It's very strange how it says one concurrent view and then it promptly goes back to 0, presumably to demoralise me. But I'm used to talking into the abyss, having done so for many, many years. But do I have anything new to say? Well, of late I seem to be filling up with ideas because, well, it's really helpful when people engage with me, even to a minimal extent, because just their disagreement sets into motion a train of thought that, well, leads from one to another and from one conclusion to another and develops the arguments, and they may not even know they're doing it, but I am grateful to my muse. And often I find that in explaining something to someone, I explain things more clearly to myself, and in the course of defending yourself against whatever arguments they have against yours, you find a better argument. So I am always grateful when people engage with me, and I don't mind at all if they disagree with me, because I find that often I don't agree with myself. My younger self would not agree with my older self, and my older, wiser self will certainly does not agree with my younger self. I do change my views, although I can be reassuringly consistent. And I think staying the same gives you your sense of identity. What is more annoying than somebody who says different things to different people depending on who is asking? You would rightly think that such a person is not to be trusted if they give a different answer to the same question if asked by different people. My answer is the same. Whoever asks me, I often am asked if I would recommend the same moral and legal political system to the country of my origin, or the country even of my ancestral origin. And the answer is yes. And I think I can easily show a record of saying things that would support this. So I see survival and empathy as posting in the chat saying Constantine and Charlemagne stopped Islam in Western Europe a long time ago. You would be wrong about Constantine, because Constantine had to... Well, you know what he did. Constantine the Great adopted Christianity when he knew that the Roman religion was failing. And at the time, there was no Islam around, because if you know your history, you would know that Rome fell before Muhammad was born. So you got that bit of your history wrong. As for Charlemagne and his Holy Roman Empire, well, that was just, well, kings using Christianity to establish an empire through the cooperation of the different monarchs which would be elected. Just imagine that, an elected monarch. I think that was how the Holy Roman Empire worked. There would be an elector, wouldn't there? Elector. Holy Roman Empire. Here, somebody called the Prince Elector, electors of the Holy Roman Empire. And there would be an electoral college. From the 13th century onwards, the prince electors had the privilege of electing the monarch who would be crowned by the Pope. After 1508, there were no imperial coronations and the election was sufficient. How very businesslike. Charles V was the last emperor to be crowned. His successors were elected emperors by the Electoral College, each being titled Elected Emperor of the Romans. So that was how it came to be said that the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. So this was clearly an arrangement of the different European monarchs to share power in a peaceful way, until the whole thing broke down in the European wars of religion, and different European countries would break down their relationship with the Pope in a different way. They would, well, I suppose, have different bones of contention. I'm afraid I didn't properly learn about the Holy Roman Empire. Just skimming through Wikipedia, so don't consider me authoritative on the subject at all. But I think survival and empathy is really talking about Muslim invasions. And the Crusades, of course. But the Pope who declared the Crusades, Pope Innocent, was, well, I suppose the Crusades were the equivalent of neocon wars of the time, imperialistic wars that all the vassal states of the Pope had to participate in or feel, well, left out. Obviously, it drained their coffers. Obviously, a lot of people didn't want to go to war. And were forced into going to war, and it was an expensive business, and it must have caused a lot of conflict within the kingdoms of the different European states that they would have objected to it, and I guess one of the quickest way of making your displeasure at your Pope known is to threaten to convert to Islam and go over to the side of the enemy. And in those days there was a rule whereby the religion of the monarch would be the religion of his subjects. So if King John had converted to Islam, then nominally at least his subjects would be converted instantly to Islam, unless they were Jews, because Jews were allowed the special privilege of keeping their religion because Christian monarchs of the time implicitly accepted their senior status because of the narrative of Christianity, and that without Judaism there would be no Jews, and without Jews there would be no Christ for Christians to worship as the co-equal of the Abrahamic God. Anyway, as I was explaining that King John was rumoured to have threatened to convert to Islam to annoy Pope Innocent, who who excommunicated him, basically. There's no official record of him saying that. There's something in Wikipedia, but it does say it's only a rumour that King John said he was going to convert to Islam, but was sent away with a flea in his ear by some Berber pirate or something. And then I discovered that Henry II had also threatened to convert to Islam, and this is completely new to me. Henry II was the one who said, will no one rid me of this turbulent priest? So basically he was the one who placed, despite the warnings of his mother, his friend Thomas à Becket. He made him Archbishop of Canterbury, thinking that à Becket would be cooperative and help him, but he did the opposite, and he basically supported the Pope to such an annoying extent that he said what he did, and then his knights killed Thomas à Becket in the cathedral. So historically there's always been a struggle for power between the European monarchs and the Pope, who was still controlling them from Rome. Before the Catholic Church, it was the Roman Empire telling them what to do, and they would send their armies until they declined and fell as an empire, and the Pope in Rome could only do it through spiritually terrifying the Christian monarchs of Europe. Until, I suppose, they grew a mind of their own and thought, well, we're not standing for that. Why should we put up with the Pope telling us what to do? But there must have been conflicts, because we know that Christian monarchs wouldn't quite dare to declare their atheism. That would be that would have been a way of cutting off the influence of Rome. But there was no such thing as communism, because really most people believed in God. It was assumed. God's existence was assumed in those times, and it would take a very determined king to change the minds of all his subjects from belief in God to atheism, in one reign anyway. But the idea of converting to Islam is not a new one, really. I thought it was King John. I really thought it was King John who was the first in the 13th century, when he had this row with the Pope, because the Pope wanted Stephen Langton to replace the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had died, and he didn't want the Pope's candidate, he wanted his own, so he quarrelled with the Pope, and the Pope placed him under an interdict, meaning that he was excommunicated. So that was a kind of, EU empire in those days, but operating on a spiritual, theological basis. King John was known to joke about the implausibility of the resurrection of Christ, which I would argue makes him a proto-Muslim, because if you believe in the Abrahamic God and you're not Jewish, which means you're a Gentile, then you'd be closer to being Muslim than to being Christian if you reject the Trinity. So I would say King John was a proto-Muslim, and Henry II certainly was, I think. I mean, he didn't quite dare because, of all the, administrative problems of actually getting his subjects to become Muslim. I don't know if he knew of which Egyptian king was it? It was Tutankhamun, wasn't it? He was the one who said, forget all the different deities of the Egyptian pantheon. Just worship, the sun god through me, Aten. So, Atenism was a monotheist faith, because it worshipped the god Aten, depicted as a disk of the sun, and originally an aspect of the traditional solar deity Ra. In the 14th century BC, Atenism was Egypt's state religion for about 20 years, before subsequent rulers returned to the traditional polytheistic religion, and the pharaohs associated with Atenism were erased from Egyptian records. Interesting, isn't it? Now, we can only suppose that this king, this Egyptian pharaoh, wanted to take away the power of the priesthood and vest their power in him solely. It was Amenhotep the fourth who initially introduced Atenism in the 5th year of his reign, raising Aten to the status of supreme god, initially permitting continuing worship of the traditional gods. Later, Akhenaten forbade the worship of other gods, a radical departure from the centuries of Egyptian religious practice. To emphasize the change, Aten's name was written in the cartouche form normally reserved for pharaohs, an innovation of Atenism. The religious reformation appears to coincide with the proclamation of the said festival, a sort of royal jubilee intended to reinforce the pharaoh's divine powers of kingship. So I think you can look it up yourselves, but it's pretty obvious what this Atenism was for the Egyptian pharaohs, which was a power grab. Presumably the priesthood was getting a bit too big for its boots, and the king thought they'd wrest power back. Under the heading of Contrast with Traditional Egyptian Religion. Akhenaten carried out a radical program of religious reform. For about 20 years, he largely supplanted the age-old beliefs and practices of the Egyptian state religion and deposed its religious hierarchy. See, I told you. Headed by the powerful priesthood of Amun at Thebes. For 15 centuries, the Egyptians had worshipped an extended family of gods and goddesses, each of which had its own elaborate system of priests, temples, shrines, and rituals. A key feature of the cults was the veneration of images and statues of the gods, which were worshipped in the dark confines of the temples. The pinnacle of the religious hierarchy was a pharaoh, both king and living god. Administration of the Egyptian kingdom was thus inextricably bound up with and largely controlled by the power and influence of the priests and scribes. Akhenaten's reforms cut away both the philosophical and economic bases of priestly power, abolishing the cults of all other deities, and with them the large and lucrative industry of sacrifices and tributes that the priests controlled. At the same time, he strengthened the role of the pharaoh. Dominic Montserrat, analysing the various versions of the hymns to the Aten, argues that all versions of the hymns focus on the king. He suggests that the real innovation is to redefine the relationship of God and king in a way that benefited Akhenaten, quoting a statement of Egyptologist John Baines. Amarna religion was a religion of God and king, or even of king first and then God. Oh, that's interesting. Decline. The collapse of Artanism began during Akhenaten's late reign, when a major plague spread across the ancient Near East. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? This pandemic appears to have claimed the life of numerous royal families and high-ranking officials, possibly contributing to the decline of Akhenaten's government. The events of this period are not well known due to the paucity and fragmentary nature of surviving sources. According to the most likely scenario, the widespread death due to the plague caused Akhenaten to appoint two co-regents in quick succession. I'm not going to pronounce the names. The origin of both is not attested, though it has been speculated that one of them, beginning with S, was a younger brother of Akhenaten, where the one whose name begins with N was in fact Queen Nefertiti. Okay, well, it's getting a bit complicated. But anyway, after the ancient Egyptians came, the ancient kingdom of Israel, because of all the... Actually, I don't know. It must have been... Okay, I'm going to check the list of Egyptian pharaohs to check which one was reigning when Moses fled Egypt. Historicity. Oh, I don't know. So it said would be somebody called Amozunk and Rasmos. Okay, I don't know whether this was... Okay, was Artanism... I think Artanism was well before Moses. Because, obviously, monotheism was tried before the Abrahamic God was conceived of by Abraham. Anyway, I've got a helpful article by... Got questions. So... So Otanism came before Judaism. So the theory is that the Hebrews, liked many aspects of Otanism, and therefore incorporated Otanism into their own religious systems upon leaving Egypt. According to the theory, the monotheism of Judaism, later Christianity, was copied from Otanism. Moses stole the idea from Akhenaten. It doesn't matter at all whether God exists or not, except, apart from because the idea is useful, and people will argue because it's not obvious that God exists or doesn't exist, and there are only arguments for his existence or non-existence, and obviously people argue about it because the effect of following God's laws is immensely political and moral, because it would change our behaviour, obviously. So we return to England in medieval times, when there were all these arguments about who should control whom and why. And I would say that what has happened in Europe was actually inevitable. When you look at it, how can you prevent European monarchs, once they became civilized and confident enough to, and educated, they would have their own ideas about how to rule their kingdoms, and they were not forever going to be told by the Pope who they could or couldn't marry and what they could or couldn't do, unless it was by force. And I know that the Pope used to command armies, and until he decided not to. So what has this got to do with Islam? Obviously, Christianity is one of the two main Abrahamic religions for Gentiles. So there are really only two. I mean, some people might talk about Baha'ism, but they don't really count because they have no influence. And what I know about them is that they are liberal and shunned by Iranians. So how should we choose our religion? I have said that you would have to choose the most powerful God, and this is really the difference between the Abrahamic God and Aten, because Aten was, he wasn't meant to be, a particularly nice God. He only spoke directly through to the Pharaoh, who was his kind of regent or intercessor on earth between the sun god Ra and the Egyptians, who were the subjects of the Pharaoh. And Abraham basically said, this Abrahamic God that I have conceived of, he's also a human sacrifice. So that must have been immensely appealing. I know the God of the Old Testament doesn't sound like a very nice God, but obviously, it's all relative. The idea is that the Abrahamic God was capable of being merciful, or conceptually capable of being merciful. And that was enough. Well, no attribute such as mercy was conferred on the god Aten. But back to the question of which religion we should choose. I mean, why do we need to choose a religion? Well, obviously, we need a moral basis for our laws. Why do we need a moral basis for our laws? Because it would tend to keep people quiescent if they believed that their rulers were benevolent and their laws just. And that would tend to make your kingdom, your nation more stable. That is really the intention. You don't want to keep changing the law. You don't want to be subject to some person who thinks he's God, such as a pharaoh, doing whatever he liked to you. And we know from English history, or I'm sure any other history, that the king would have trouble controlling his barons. Or, I guess if you're Hindu, you would know that your king would have trouble controlling the warrior class, and that's what barons were. They were the warrior class, and the Hindu system is in a way universal when you think of how it's stratified, with the priesthood always at the top, and sort of brains first, and then muscle, then brawn second, and then money third, and labour fourth, and unskilled labour right at the bottom. It still operates now. So really, in a way, the Hindu caste system is eternal and universal. But what we want to do about the Hindu caste system is to take away the rigidity of the caste system. Because what you have in a caste system is a kind of enforced separation of the gene pools of the different occupations. So there is no possibility of a meritocracy. Why did they keep it like that? Presumably because the monarch, the priesthood, thought it was better to keep people divided so that they wouldn't rise up and overthrow the monarch. And they must have thought, to keep them divided was safer for them. But now you get to our oligarchy, which is basically a two-class system, the middle classes and the working classes, and that would be how the political interest of Western nations is divided. Just to keep it simple, just make it between the middle classes and the working classes. But even that is very divisive, as we have found, have we not? With Labour and Tory and Republican and Democrat. And as you all know, those of you who paid attention, is that I advocate a one-party state, just to make things even simpler. Of course there are objections, and this means, and the usual objection would be, but it would mean that we're totalitarian and we'd be unresponsive to change. And to this I would answer, look at China. It changes its policies. It actually changes its policies. And China has a tradition of statecraft, which means it knows, its political classes knows it is supposed to to be responsive to change and to innovate and improve and consolidate and sustain the empire that is China. And this tradition means really that its government is more likely to govern in the national interest and will not be sidetracked into pointless class disputes such as Western nations are prone to. We were talking earlier about the caste system, which was unnecessarily divisive. But even a two-party system is divisive enough to, well, destroy your civilization, really, because what happens when our political classes fight amongst themselves is that only party interest reigns supreme. But is there anything inherently virtuous about being born middle class or working class? No, there isn't. And so this division, this class division is, well, unnecessarily divisive. What possible divisions would there be in a one-party state? I would say, well, the one-party state I have in mind would be to govern in the national interest, and therefore the only political disagreements allowed would be what is or isn't in the national interest. And this could get very divisive, and therefore you impose a system of rules that keep it all under control, such as the rules in the Quran. So we'll just assume that whatever the Quran allows or forbids should be the law. And within that, our political classes can argue about how to interpret these verses, which is, of course, what they will be fighting about should what I propose ever be implemented. And I think that's fair enough. And that would make a lot of sense. I still hope that there are people capable of discussing this who would already have assumed that Christianity has failed because conservatism has failed. It was once said that, what was it? The Church of England is the Tory party. No, the Conservative Party is the Church of England at prayer. In those times when the British believed in going to church or pretending to support whatever principles they thought Christian principles were, at the time, I think Christianity more or less conformed to the principles of the no-hide laws, because there would be the usual prohibitions against extramarital sex, including sodomy and adultery and fornication and that kind of thing, and these rules were quite strictly enforced, as is so different from our times. So all this nonsense about Jesus being the co-equal of God can be kept up as long as you are a patriarchy. You can, say it doesn't matter, or we don't talk about that in polite society. There's no need to talk about the Trinity and whether it's literally true. Shut up. What else do you expect us to be Muslim? All these conversations must have taken place at some time in British history, but at the time all these things could be swept under the carpet as long as patriarchy was in existence, but now it is no longer in existence and things are going quickly from bad to worse. And all because people can't discuss these things, won't discuss these things, and think they can get away with making up the rules as they go along. Is there anything inherently immoral about making up the rules as we go along? I would say yes, if there is already a better system of not making up the rules as we go along. What are the disadvantages of making up the rules as we go along? Well, it would cause injustice and grievance and distrust and lack of confidence in the government and lack of, actual hatred for the political classes. So that would be the problem of making up the rules as we go along. And this would have, no longer making up the rules as we go along would be against the doctrine of parliamentary supremacy. And then this is the doctrine under which both Israel and Britain operate. This is interesting, isn't it? Now, what about America? I know you're going to ask, what about America? Well, America, technically, it's not a sovereign. It doesn't have a sovereign, so it would make sense to talk about the Americans as having a sovereign state. They would have a constitutional state, and they would have to, officially anyway, do what their constitution allows them to do. Of course, in practice, they break all the rules, but we're just talking in theory anyway, in political theory, about the differences between between nations in which parliamentary supremacy operate and nations that have a constitution. I'm certainly not saying that countries that have a constitution never change their laws. They do, but they have to go through, certain processes, formal processes that are just a bit, slower, that will, put obstacles in the paths of unscrupulous, incompetent, immoral, corrupt politicians from making crazy laws. So yes, I am saying that the best form of government would be an Islamic republic and a one-party state, because that would be the most rational form of government, assuming that we adhere to a constitution, and that constitution would be, based on the Quran. Then we would all know what the rules are, or if we didn't, we could read the Quran and understand it, and then, we'll argue about how to interpret it, but at least that would, funnel the areas of disagreement into, something more manageable than what it is now. And of course it would be rational in solving and avoiding future problems. What is to be done about the European monarchies up and up and down Europe? That would be the interesting question. I've already said that I think, the only way to do it properly in Britain would be to disestablish the Church of England. The monarch has the option of becoming his own Archbishop of Canterbury. So this is something Charles could do if he wanted to, before abolishing the monarchy. I know what they did to the French and the Russian monarchies, and I'm certainly not proposing anything like that. I think it would be a good idea to give the institution of monarchy a fighting chance and allow Charles to be the head of his own Church of England. There is a possibility that he might simply convert to Islam. And what would happen then? Well, I suppose he could hand over, it's like, well, he can't be the head of the Church of England if he chooses to convert to Islam. But then, I think a lot of people would convert to Islam if he did convert to Islam. And in a way that this rule of, what is it, the Latin term? Eius regio, cuius religio, would still hold, even in the 21st century, because people would be so impressed that he could convert it to Islam that I think a lot of people would, and once they do, all the respectable, or people who want political, intellectual, and moral respectability would convert to Islam, and that would start the whole process. And of course it should be done from the top, because that would be the most, the method whereby least blood will be shed, should such a thing take place. What would happen to the institution of the monarchy? Well, it would actually depend on, okay, let's say Charles decides to convert to Islam, and then, the throne is empty, and maybe William wants to become monarch, and or maybe he doesn't. He wants to, I think, I'm not going to be, I'm not proposing to just abolish the monarchy. I'm going to give them a fighting chance to remain in existence if that's what they want. But Harry, what's the succession? Let's have a look at the rules of succession. I can't remember offhand. Oh, quite a few people now. It's nice of you to come. Succession, Wolf. Succession to the British throne. I do feel inspired. I've got quite a few big ideas in this stream, haven't I? I owe it to my muse. Okay, so it goes like this. To Charles, to William, to George, to Charlotte, to Louis, and then Harry. So let's say it happens. Let's say secular Quranism is adopted by 2022. And then, okay, so let's say William doesn't want it because he sees the writing on the wall, and he doesn't fancy, preaching from the pulpit as his own Archbishop of Canterbury. And George is too young, Charlotte's too young, Louis is too young, and the next person would be Harry, and Harry doesn't want to come back from America, right? And Archie and Lilibet are too young, and then it goes to Andrew. Oh my God, Andrew. He's a bit he's under a cloud, isn't he? And then it goes to Beatrice and Sienna and Eugenie and August Brooksbank was born this year. And then it goes to Edward, and then his children. It's like it's not going to work, is it? And okay, so let's assume that Edward's kids don't want it. That would be James and Louise. James Mountbatten Windsor was born in 2007. Lady Louise Mountbatten Windsor was born in 2003. Too young. And then it goes to the 17th in line would be Anne, and then Peter Phillips. So too young, and then it goes to David Armstrong Jones. Furniture maker, former chairman of the auction house at Christie's. I don't think he wants a job, do you? Then it goes to Lady Sarah Chatto. What does she want to do? What does she do? Only daughter of Princess Margaret and the only niece of Queen Elizabeth. Professional life. He's won a few rewards. She's some sort of artist, I think. She attended Bedale School, which she left with a single A-level in art. She enrolled at the Camberwell School of Art. She's a photographer. She was employed to photograph the production of A Passage to India. Gave her a job as an intern assessing the wardrobe department without credit. Okay, not properly trained. She wouldn't, we wouldn't expect her to do a good job because, well, okay, somebody more appropriate. Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester. Oh no, sorry, he's dead. No, who was that? The 31st in line, Prince Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Born 1944, so he's not young. He was an architect. He's the highest person on the list who is not a direct descendant of King George VI, who was his uncle. Right. So we can have an architect, monarch, go right to the end of this list. Not quite sure the... Okay, wait. No, I just don't think it'll work. Do you? The young ones are just they're not going to be up to the job. They'll want to party and go to Ibiza or whatever, go clubbing, and it's just not up to the job, and they don't want a job probably. So we give it to Prince Michael of Kent, born 1942. Probably would like the job, wouldn't he? Anyway, you get the idea. The institution of monarchy is now an anachronism because, well, it's had its time. I mean, obviously you did need a king in the olden days because you needed somebody to lead the troops into battle and whatever, and you needed a brave person who could ride and kill people efficiently, and that was whom you chose to be your king in the olden days when you needed a strong man. But now in a complex modern society, and battles are no longer fought in this way, then you would need, as your leader, the best brains in the country. Do we have the best brains in the country running our country? I don't think so. Even if they did go to the best schools, I don't think they've been taught anything particularly useful. And we know they have no morals. And we know they have no morals because Christianity is kaput. I don't know any Christians, I really don't. I know people who go to church, for weddings and funerals and that sort of thing. I've done the same thing myself, but, as a living, operating system of morality, Christianity stopped operating as a system of morality many decades ago. And I don't think we can pretend that we don't need a moral system. Only people who are narcissists, nihilists and atheists would want to pretend that, and they would be childless people too, they would be the ones most vested in saying that liberalism is fine. It's good enough for me. I don't have any children, so I don't give a damn about this country going down the toilet after I am dead. So I'm not going to be rocking the boat. I'm not going to be saying anything to get myself cancelled. I'm not going to be sticking my neck out saying things that are going to offend people. So these are the people you can dismiss already. Or if they have children, they probably don't care about them. They probably hate them. So who would be most likely to consider my offered option of secular Quranism for your non-Muslim Western country? People with legitimate children who want their children to have legitimate children. people who care about the principle of the thing, people who don't want to keep blaming the Jews and think, well, maybe something went wrong with liberalism or Christianity. Otherwise, things would be fine, wouldn't they? But obviously something went wrong. So in the 12th and 13th century, when it was first a little glimmer in the ideas, in the minds of two English monarchs that they might convert to Islam to escape the control of Rome, the idea comes back again about how to escape the control of the EU, which is a new form of Pope Innocent, isn't it? So if you want your national sovereignty, then you should be able to, well, if you want it enough, then you should be able to consider the option of secular Quranism. I'm not expecting anyone to suddenly believe in God. I am, after all, an agnostic. But I think even those who are atheists do see the utility of having a religion and having a hypothetical supreme authority. And once the utility of believing in God is acknowledged and accepted, and the logical necessity of obeying his laws also acknowledged and accepted, then things will follow one upon the other. My only problem is people not being able to engage with me on this subject. I try to get the attention of people, of YouTubers with bigger channels than me, but I don't think they're really interested in talking about this because they want to keep selling what the punters want, what their viewers and subscribers want, and they want the same thing about, Jews being responsible for all their ills. And to the extent that Jews are responsible, it would be because they don't do what they're supposed to do. And of course they are supposed to teach no-hide laws, and these rabbis are feeling a little shy because they sense the furnace of anti-Semitism being stoked, and they don't want to offend their Christian overlords. So they must be enticed, encouraged to discuss the no-hide laws. And I have a few ideas to get them to engage, but I can't do it all on my own. Concurrent viewers, thank you for coming. Hello, Amanda. So how are things in the Lebanon? Long time no see. Christine Ramsey is saying in her usual way to go home. Well, I would like to present my solution to to Western nations. I really, I will go home. If you want me to go home, I'll go home. But I feel that I must somehow impress upon you that I want a response. You don't have to say yes. I just want you to acknowledge what I've said, to show you understand what I'm saying, and then you can say, no, Claire, you're silly. We have a better idea, and it is, fill in the blank. Or you can even say, no, we haven't got a better idea, but we still rather not, and it's all we'd just rather die. Yeah, frankly, we would just rather die. So thanks, but no thanks. You could say that too, but I just want it, formally acknowledged that you have received and understood my message and know what I'm proposing, and you can always say, well, it's not practicable because whatever. But I just want a considered response, and yeah, I'll go. So I'll start Z2. I didn't do anything to do. I for some reason the sound is always a little ropey at the beginning, but I don't do anything to it at all. In fact, I don't know how to. I'm not sitting any further or nearer to the mic. It's always like that. So self-hating Jews still doesn't get it about a marriage certificate. That should be the rule. If you're not married, you're not allowed to have babies. Still don't get it. But then, it's people who don't care about the principle of the thing, who are atheists, and people without a religion just don't get the principles. They'll never get it, probably. It's just a kind of dead part of their mind that's incapable of understanding the principle of the thing. Is it because they are bastards themselves? Is it because they have bastards? I don't know, but I think you can still understand that it's not ideal, is it? It's not ideal. So if you respect your progeny enough to at least marry before you have children, then you're going to have better quality progeny and be in a position to better parent them. But if you don't give a damn, then you'll just be cursed with illegitimate offspring and illegitimate descendants and people who don't do quite as well as other people. But hey, you can always blame the Jews, right? That's enough to make a lot of people happy. We've got Jews to blame. But, this is something that you should know, that scapegoating is a Jewish idea. So they thought of it before you guys. Scapegoating, throwing some goat off as, representative of the sins of their community. So Amanda says Jews are what went wrong with liberalism. There's something wrong with liberalism anyway, Jews or no Jews. Liberalism is not a Jewish idea. You can easily construct an argument that Jews had their morals corrupted by liberalism in exactly the same way that Gentiles had their morals corrupted by liberalism. I suppose the reason why you keep blaming Jews is because, okay, I would say that the problem is that there's already a problem with liberalism, but because you've always disliked Jews, it's like somehow a Jew being a liberal is more annoying than a Gentile being a liberal. So you can only concentrate on a Gentile being a Jew being a liberal, but you think, oh, it's okay for Gentiles to be liberal, but for Jews to be liberal, no, we can't stand it. So I think it's that way of thinking that that creates anti-Semitism, because really, you probably think, well, we've never liked them, so why can't we blame them for everything? Why not? What's to stop us? And why can't we say it? And I'm not proposing to stop anybody from saying, Jews are to blame, as long as they can answer back. I mean, why do you want to do it? I suppose it's some sort of Gentile Christian compulsion, just because of envy, I suppose. You find yourself worshipping a Jew, and you think, why are we worshipping a Jew? What's a big deal about Jews? And then you think, oh, because they're God's chosen people, and it's like, why were they chosen? And not us? And then I guess it'll create a sense of envy, and then you think, oh, but they're not doing anything much, and not observant even, and so you don't see them as deserving, perhaps, of their special status, and indeed they shouldn't deserve their special status if they're not observant Jews, and in fact the Torah says that. Torah says that Jews breaking the Sabbath are to be stoned outside the city walls. Well, they don't do that because, well, I guess they can use their exile as an excuse, right? They can say, well, we can't. We have no city gates to stone Sabbath-breaking Jews. And anyway, those city gates would be located in Israel, and we just don't do that sort of thing anymore because it's, under Gentile administration, under, the Palestine Mandate, or and the Americans wouldn't allow the Israelis to stone each other to death for breaking the Sabbath. So I guess they've got a good excuse for not doing it. So it's actually politically impossible for Jews to live in a Torah theocracy anyway. They can't do it. The 613 laws, they can't do it without a temple, and as you know, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is on Temple Mount. What a coincidence. And or you can interpret it in two ways. I suppose, for Jews waiting patiently for the Messiah to come, they'll say, we'll know what to do with Al-Aqsa Mosque once the Messiah comes. We don't have to trouble ourselves with thinking about it anymore. But I would interpret the existence of Al-Aqsa as God, if he exists, saying, you're not up to living under Torah theocracy, so how about Sharia? How about secular Quranism with Israeli characteristics? How about it, mate? I think that's what he's saying. And it seems a very obvious option. And rabbis could help me and say, that actually, Claire, secular Quranism is of equal status to Islam, and Islam is the most no-hide of all Gentile religions, because there's nothing in the Quran that says anything that is against the no-hide laws. So they could say that if they were being helpful. And they might even say, well, technically, it's death for Jews who are convicted of idolatry and blasphemy. We think that the first 5 laws, laws forbidding murder, theft, sexual immorality, eating an animal while it's alive, and having a court and legal system to enforce these laws. But we think these laws would not be found objectionable even by atheists. So the last 2, the prohibitions against idolatry and blasphemy, would be found to be objectionable by atheists. And even then I would have an answer and say, that's fine, it doesn't matter if you don't think Islam or the Quran is quite kosher enough for your high standards. The fact is that whether it's kosher enough for you, it still is the most no-hide observant religion around. So that's obviously the one to choose. So even if it doesn't execute idolaters and blasphemers, it's still the best one around, the most no-hide compliant religion around. So that's the one that has to be chosen. And as for the least no-hide observant religion, that will be Christianity, and it will be less no-hide even than Hinduism, which is only idolatry. But Christianity is blasphemy as well as idolatry. So it's time for people who are Christian to give it up. I mean, nobody's going to force you, of course not, but people are just invited to have a think about it, and also to consider Christian history and the Christian practice of burning heretics at the stake, because they couldn't quite see why Jesus is God and wouldn't shut up about it, and for that reason they got themselves burnt at the stake for a matter of principle. But now that nobody has any principles anymore, nobody really cares. But then nobody understands their history either, do they? So it would really be helpful if rabbis put secular Quranism on par with Islam, which is the most no-hide Gentile religion based on a holy book that has nothing in it that offends against the no-hide laws. And that's all they have to say. And doing that would be the perfect way of doing what they're supposed to do as God's chosen people, teaching the no-hide laws properly by ranking the 4 Gentile religions according to their conformity with the no-hide laws, and resigning from the job, because obviously they're not really able to do more than that, being 0.1% of the total global human population. And also they're not allowed to extend their borders beyond Greater Israel, and the borders of Israel have already been defined in the Torah. So God doesn't expect Jews to actually take over the world like the British and the Americans and the Spanish have done, and and then they can retire and become Muslims in Israel, or they can, live their lives out as Jews. But I mean, I would say that after so many centuries of suffering from anti-Semitism, they don't have to be Jews anymore once they do their job of making Gentile nations righteous Gentile nations, and then that there's no need for them to do the hard work of remaining in existence anymore, because then their job would be done. So really the reward for Jews would be to become Muslim, because that they would be entitled to become Noahides themselves and get to heaven more easily. So that would complete the narrative that I hope will be understood and accepted, preferably within my lifetime, with a little bit of help from my friends and associates, and the odd courageous rabbi prepared to go along with my plans. Well, self-hating Jew, I'm glad to hear that you were conceived within wedlock. So, and what's wrong with me saying that children should be conceived within wedlock? What's wrong with that? No, I can't do another stream tonight, Assad Z2, because I'll be busy. But I think I've said what I wanted to say in 1 hour 23 minutes, and I will sum up what I thought I said, which is that the idea of England becoming Muslim is not really a new one, and it goes back to the time of the Plantagenets, Henry II, the one who said, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" and that resulted in Thomas a Becket being slain in was it Canterbury Cathedral. So that was and this was really the Archbishop of Canterbury being too loyal to the Pope, and of course conflicting loyalties would be, well, I think it's always the case in politics that you would be pulled into two different directions from your desire to be of public service and also the desire to serve your own private interests. And what I propose would make it clearer for people and make it easier for people to do the right thing, and for the law to reward those who did the right thing and to punish those who did the wrong thing. And to this end, the patriarchy must be restored, because the purpose of men is really for defensive purposes. That men are expected to defend their territory, their property, Well, because who else would? You can't expect women to go fighting and stuff. And women, I suppose, well, I suppose we're there to make men feel that it's all worthwhile, that they didn't do the wrong thing by marrying us and whatever. And as for those of us who are, not inclined to marry, or I think there are advantages too. I mean, because nobody's going to force you to marry, and if you're gay, you can be discreetly gay. You just can't, boast about it and marry and or that kind of thing. So the only thing that will change under secular Quranism is that you won't be allowed to marry a member of the same sex. You won't. The civil partnership would be over and out. What about clubs and things? Well, clubs and things are private property. I'm not proposing to ban nightclubs and things like that. So I think that there will be a certain amount of leeway for people to do what naughty things they have become accustomed to doing and wanting to do. So it won't be as bad as you think once it's implemented. So thanks for listening, and I will talk to you soon, but probably not tonight.